What you find out in your life when you're young, and you need to know this, all of you, is that you need to get good at least one thing. So you need to get very good at least one thing. You have to specialize in something. And that was really the point of an apprenticeship, right? Because you subject yourself to a master, and I'll use that term despite its connotations, let's say. You subjected yourself voluntarily to the discipline imposed in a single direction. The philosophers Nietzsche pointed out that nothing of any value could be attained, even on the front of freedom, without first subjecting yourself to intense voluntary discipline. And so he thought of voluntary slavery in some sense as the precondition for freedom. And you can think about that. Imagine that you're trying to learn to play a musical instrument. Or imagine what you had to go through when you learned to read. There's that initial process of skill automation, which is very painstaking and difficult. But once you master it, to pass through that disciplinary structure, then you have freedoms that you wouldn't have had before. Once you learn to read music and to position your hands properly on the piano keyboard and to play the appropriate scales and chords, then you can play music, and you couldn't do that to begin with. And so the subjugation of yourself to a disciplinary structure actually frees you. Which is another thing conservatives have to tell young people. And then the other thing you'll note that you do note as you get older, if you've gone through a disciplinary process or a multitude of them, is that they first narrow you as you specialize, but then as you get deeper and deeper into your specialization, the world broadens out in front of you. And so, for example, when I went off to do my PhD, I studied alcoholism. But in order to study alcohol and its effects on the brain, I had to study neuroscience and neuropsychology. And once I started studying neuroscience and neuropsychology, neuropharmacology for that matter as well, then I had to understand, well, turns out I had to understand, at least to the degree I was capable, the functioning of the entire brain, because alcohol washes the entire brain like water. And so I had to write a thesis, which is a disciplinary process, focused particularly on the genetic predisposition among males with multi-generational family histories of alcoholism to alcohol reward. And that's a very specific topic, but it didn't matter because as I got deeper and deeper into it, it started to reconnect to the whole world. And so it's extremely useful for you to master something. Pick something, or more than one thing, but start with something. And in some sense, it doesn't really matter what it is. It just matters that you do it. And what'll happen is you'll also develop the discipline that goes along with that process of self-mastery. And once you have that discipline instantiated because you subjected yourself voluntarily to a particular goal, you can take that discipline and subject yourself to other goals as a consequence. And so you don't have to worry that if you become a master of one thing, you become a jack of no trades. The greatest people I've met, I knew a great artist in Montreal. He was a very good friend of mine. And he was a licensed taxi driver and a licensed carpenter and a licensed boat pilot and a great interior decorator and extremely skilled socially and a great visual artist. He had that all at his fingertips, and that was multiple masters. He had served multiple masters and become a master himself. It's okay to wander around stupidly before you fix your destination. Now, you see that echoed in Exodus, right? Because what happens is that the Egyptians, or the Hebrews, escape a tyranny, which is kind of whatever you do personally and psychologically when you escape from your previous set of stupidly held and ignorant and stubborn axioms. Like, away from that tyranny. It's like, great, I freed myself from that. Well, then what? Well, you think, well, now I'm on the way. It's, no, you're not. Now you're in the desert, where you wander around stupidly, and worship the wrong things until you finally organize yourself morally and get correctly. So that's where it's. Well, I got rid of a lot of things, baggage, excess baggage that I didn't need in my life, and now everything's okay. It's like, no, it's not. You've got rid of a whole set of scaffolds that were keeping you in place, even though they were pathological. Now you have nothing, and nothing actually turns out to be better than something pathological, but you're still stuck with the problem of nothing, and that's exactly why Exodus is structured the way that it is. It's that
You escape from a tyranny, it's hooray, we're no longer slaves. Yeah, well, now you're nihilistic and lost. It's not necessarily an improvement. But it is see, it's also useful to know that, because you can also be deluded into the idea that, imagine that you're trying to become enlightened, which might mean to turn all those parts of you on that could be turned on. You think, well, that's just a linear pathway uphill. It's just from one success to another. No, it's not. It's like, here you are and you're not doing too badly, and the first step is a complete bloody catastrophe. It's worse. And then maybe you can pull yourself together and you hit a new plateau, and then that crumbles and shakes, and bang, it's worse again. And so, because part of the reason that people don't become enlightened is because it's punctuated by intermittent deserts, essentially by intermittent catastrophes. And if you don't know that, well, then you're basically screwed, because you go ahead on your movement forward and you collapse, and you think, well, that didn't work, I collapsed. It's like, no, that's par for the course. It's not indication that you failed, it's just indication that it's really hard. And that when you learn something, you also unlearn something. And the thing you unlearned is probably useful, and unlearning it actually is painful. Let's say if you have to get out of a bad relationship. It's like there isn't any relationship that's 100% bad. And so when you jump out of it, well, maybe you're in better shape, but you're still lonesome and disoriented, and you don't know what your past was, and you don't know what your present is, and you don't know what your future is. That's why people stay with the devil they know instead of looking for the devil they don't know. So anyways, the fact that you're full of faults doesn't mean you have to stop. And thank God for that. That's a really useful thing. And the fact that you're full of faults doesn't mean that you can't learn. And so you can posit an ideal, and you're going to be wrong about it, but it doesn't matter, because what you're right about is positing the ideal and moving towards it. If the actual ideal isn't conceptualized perfectly, well, first, surprise, surprise, because what are you going to do that's perfect? So it doesn't matter that it's imperfect. It just matters that you do it and that you move forward. So that's really positive news as far as I'm concerned, because you can actually do that, right? You can do it badly. Anyone can do that. So that's useful. Okay, so if you were an efficient person, you would have just done that. But you're not. But who cares? You still end up in the same place. And maybe the trip is even more interesting. Who knows? Probably too interesting. Jung. I began to understand that the goal of psychic development, by which he means psychological development or spiritual development, is the self. There's no linear evolution. There's only a circumambulation of the self, a getting closer. It's like you're spiraling into something. Something like that. And the thing that you're spiraling into recedes as you move towards it and gets more and more sophisticated and well-developed as you move towards it. Because you're not going to run out of goals, right? No matter how much you have your act together, there's probably, undoubtedly, 30 dimensions along which you could get your act together a lot more. So, and some of those aren't even conceivable to you when you're in your initial uncarved state, let's say.
The journey toward becoming a master by subjecting yourself to other masters. And that's really what you're supposed to do when you get educated, particularly in the humanities, because that's an apprenticeship with masters. And so you might think, like people often think when they won't discipline their children, that if you constrain your creativity in a single direction, you're going to eradicate your flexibility and your creativity, but you won't. You'll just bring order to your chaos. And once you do that, all that creative potential that you have within you will be much more likely to manifest itself. So it's very useful to seriously discipline yourself voluntarily, especially when you're young. You can find out what constraints you can abide within. You can find out how hard you can push yourself. You can find out how hard you can work. You can find out how productive and generous you can be. And all of that's unbelievably useful. And then you can dial it back a bit so it becomes sustainable. But it's good to wear yourself right to the bone if you can while you're young, so you start to understand who you are. You can't do that without pushing yourself right